Hi there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host. Hey there, and welcome to this week's show. On Monday, September 22nd, Mars will move into Scorpio, where it will spend the next 6 weeks. So today's show is going to be all about Mars in Scorpio. I'm going to take a look at some of the traits and the tendencies of Mars in Scorpio, and we'll also touch on some of the aspects that Mars in Scorpio will make with other planets during this transit. Before we drop into talking about all things Mars and Scorpio, I want to let you know about my beginner astrology course, which starts on Monday, September 22nd. If you're interested in astrology, but you're kind of confused about where to start or what to learn first, I have a grounded and supportive course for you. You'll learn essential building blocks like the 12 houses and the zodiac signs in depth, and you'll begin to make simple interpretations in a chart. There will also be live Q&As running throughout October for this course as well. If you'd like to learn astrology and become part of a really kind and caring community, pop over to kellysastrology.com where you can sign up. I'll include the direct link to register in the show notes below as well. All right, team, let's get back to Mars in Scorpio. So Mars is at home in Scorpio. So technically, this is one of the domicile or rulership places for Mars. And that tends to mean that a planet is very well resourced and has access to the best kind of tools for the task that it is trying to do. So a way of thinking about Mars in Scorpio is that Mars is very effective at doing Mars things, at exploring Scorpio kinds of topics or Mars kinds of topics. So Mars is very Marsy in a Scorpio way over the next 6 weeks. Technically, Scorpio is the nighttime home of Mars, and since Mars is a planet that belongs to the nighttime sect of planets, this is arguably Mars's most comfortable sign. What we have with Mars in Scorpio, we have a couple of pieces where the qualities of Scorpio can be very helpful to bring out the best of Mars. For instance, the cool, wet, the water qualities of Scorpio, the water sign element, can help temper the inherent heat that Mars brings, and that can tone down impulsiveness. So Mars in Scorpio is not the same as Mars in Aries, where Mars in Aries does have a little bit more of that impatience, kind of impetuous quality, whereas in Mars in Scorpio, we don't see that as much. Instead, what we do see is this kind of cool, strategic, very focused version of Mars. We do get a little bit of a sharper version of Mars in Scorpio, that idea of Mars connecting perhaps with the scorpion's tail. So there is like we're hitting a target kind of thing. We're not beating around the bush here. We're getting straight to the heart of the matter. And that's something Mars in Scorpio does not shy away from. So there's if we'd say it's a boldness or a courageousness, but not afraid of the shadows, not afraid of the truth, not afraid of calling things the way they are. That's very Mars in Scorpio. I always think of Mars in Scorpio as like a planet that has a really clear kind of game plan or a battle plan. Mars in Scorpio is not just involved in what's going on now, but there is this sense of, I also know, or I've got my eye on the next 2 or 3 moves as well. The other quality of Scorpio that I think helps steady Mars is that Scorpio is a fixed sign. So that fixed tone of Scorpio kind of steadies Mars. It helps, again, reduce that kind of flying off the handle reactive quality. What it helps Mars do, that fixed energy, Mars in a fixed sign Scorpio, it really does change Mars's focus away from short and immediate outcomes towards kind of longer term or more sustained ongoing operations, if you like. So Mars in Scorpio is Mars that is able to stick things out a bit longer, is able to follow through more effectively. Mars in Scorpio is going to be much better at finishing things. So Mars in Scorpio isn't going to rush in. So there's a slower decision-making process or a slower kind of rhythm to starting things with Mars in Scorpio, because there's a little bit more of a selective, discerning quality. Mars in Scorpio has got to like feel into it. And if things kind of come together in a way where they can have a sense of how it could work, then they dive in and they go all the way at that point. So Mars in Scorpio is more interested in initiatives that might take time to work towards. So that's a good clue that for all of us over the next 6 weeks, we're shifting our attention to kind of medium-term goals, things that are going to take a few months, maybe a year or two. We're really kind of locking in on a path or a groove that we can stick with for a period of time. So we can think about Mars in Scorpio as having a really methodical, measured kind of drive. There is an intensity there. So Mars in Scorpio can get kind of fixated or focused or even obsessed. But that sort of obsession of Mars in Scorpio helps with the locking in, with the sticking with, and with the following through. Another thing that I always think about Mars when it's in a water sign is that mood can influence motivation. And while I do think that's true, each water sign is more or less moody or fluctuating according to its own nature. And Scorpio is the more steady, kind of slow burn of all three of the water signs. And Mars in Scorpio, I think, kind of draws on emotional undercurrents as fuel for action and progress. So it's almost as though you don't want to deny or dismiss whatever stronger or deeper emotions you might have with Mars in Scorpio. Instead, use them as the fuel or the motivating force to do the things that need to be done. So when we think about Mars in Scorpio, I think about this kind of strength and this deep courage. I think about a placement that's really tenacious, It doesn't give up on things. It doesn't walk away just because, things get a little hard. There's that sense of like, let's get down in the mud and let's figure it out. So that idea of that tenacity of sticking with things to try to push through them or to work through them. So when we're thinking about Mars in Scorpio, I'd really encourage you to attune to your feelings, to be aware of your emotions, to kind of notice whatever strong feelings or sensations you're having, especially if some of those feelings are a little uncomfortable. Scorpio is the only water sign that is ruled by a malefic planet. It's the only water sign ruled by Mars. We have Cancer ruled by the moon, Pisces ruled by Jupiter. So they do feelings and emotions in either a moon or a Jupiter way, which is very different from how Scorpio does emotions, which is in that Marsy way. So there's like the sussing out, there's the specificity, there's like, where do I need to attack and where do I need to defend? The emotional territory has a little bit about either battleground or competitive quality in the realm of Scorpio. And so some of the feelings that come up when we have a lot of Scorpio energy, like Mars making its once in 2 year pass through Scorpio, some of the feelings that come up are the uncomfortable feelings. They're frustration, anger, annoyance, irritation, rage, even that sense of betrayal or maybe a bit of suspicion about, I'm just not sure what's really going on here or what they're really wanting from me or this situation, or I'm just not sure who I want to trust, so it's appropriate to pay attention to those inklings that may not make logical sense while Mars is in Scorpio. Being aware of those strong feelings can actually help drive you forward, or they can help kind of push you to that important decision that you need to make. It might be a decision that's kind of uncomfortable. You might have to express a truth that you've previously kept private. You might feel like you're naming something that has been difficult, and you're like, I just want to say it like it is, and I need to change it for going forward. It says all Mars in Scorpio territory. Now, Mars in Scorpio is quiet, and what I mean by that is that all the water signs have this mute designation, which means that when planets come into a water sign, they're not as verbal or expressive or as outspoken. So with Mars in Scorpio, we are not shouting about our goals from the rooftops here. We're not blasting, social media or telling everyone we know. What instead, what we're doing is we're just getting on with the business of getting things done. Mars in Scorpio is like a bit of a powerhouse, which is like, this is just what needs to be done. The engine is going in this direction. Like, you can get on board or you can jump out of the way. And there's a little bit of maybe a lack of communication that Mars in Scorpio could be associated with, because it's very focused on pushing towards the doing and the deciding. So we don't have a lot of discussion with Mars in Scorpio. So that's good to keep in mind. It's sort of a bit, in Australia, we have this saying of like heads down, bums up, which we used to, I don't know why we used to have this at school, but it was like, sit down, do your work, put your head down, kind of focus on what you need to do. And so that's what Mars in Scorpio is really focused on. It's deciding, it's doing, and then rinse and repeat. We're maybe not telling everybody, we're not bringing in a large, circle of people into the decision-making process, maybe one or two trusted confidants. And then we're like, my vibe is pushing me here. Because when we make decisions with Mars in Scorpio, it is a decisive placement, but there is a lot of ruminating over the choice before it happens. And there's an emotional component to that. So that's a bit about kind of the traits and the qualities and the things we can do or look out for and work with Mars in Scorpio. What I want to do at this point is now shift our attention to talk briefly about the different aspects that Mars in Scorpio will make over the 6-week period that Mars is in Scorpio. And, Mars is in Scorpio just once every 2 years. And when Mars comes into Scorpio, different planets are in different places. So there's different kinds of aspects that come through. For instance, when Mars is in Scorpio in 2025, this is the first time in about 8 years that we won't have an opposition from Mars in Scorpio to Uranus in Taurus. Because while Mars is in Scorpio this year, Uranus has jumped over to Gemini, and we don't have an aspect between those two. What we do have is aspects to planets like Pluto, Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn. Now, we're going to take a look at each of those aspects. I'll give you the dates and some keywords or concepts for each aspect. This is also going to be one of those episodes where it'll be great for you to bookmark and come back to, because some of these aspects are taking place well into October. We do have one coming up this week. And what I want to say with the aspects Mars in Scorpio is making is that it kind of starts in the most challenging aspect, and then from the perspective of Mars, kind of gets progressively better as it goes. So just to give that brief overview. So the first aspect Mars in Scorpio will make is Mars square Pluto. So Pluto's in Aquarius. Mars, of course, comes into Scorpio. So we're looking at one Scorpio to one Aquarius. And we are looking at September 24th, which I think is a Wednesday. So that's Mars square Pluto. And that is probably going to be the most challenging of the aspects that Mars and Scorpio will make this year. So Mars kind of drops into Scorpio, squares off with Pluto, and that is the most kind of difficult or intense version that we will get of Mars in Scorpio. So the reason to say that is that you don't think what happens in the first week of Mars in Scorpio this year, which will be, this week starting September 22nd, that's not what the whole of Mars in Scorpio will be about. Because Mars in Scorpio is a more challenging aspect. Sorry, Mars in Scorpio square Pluto in Aquarius, that is a more challenging aspect. Here we have this clash of power. We might have a confrontation between two powerful forces. We might have a resistance towards a powerful, push or movement. The idea of like control and power dynamics. Who's in charge? Who doesn't have power? The people that maybe don't have power, how are they pushing back on if there are suppressive forces? And so we have this really intense kind of forceful battle energy with Mars square Pluto. And so we're going to have tension. We're going to have some disagreement. We're going to have like that clash of desire. At a personal level, an aspect like this is kind of bumping into the kind of conflicting needs, priorities, or desires of someone else. You want to do this on this timeline, somebody else wants to do that on that timeline. And so because it's a square aspect, we need some negotiation. Even though these two planets are making this square from their places in fixed signs, which indicates there is a real reluctance to back down or to give at all. So one of the possibilities of this Mars square Pluto aspect is this type of sort of stalemate energy where we're stuck in the place of disagreement, or we're stuck in the discord because nobody is willing to give an inch or to move at all. And so with, at the personal level, there's that sense of how do we navigate when what we want bumps up against something different that somebody else really wants. So it's that idea of being at odds and maybe having a quality of differing goals or differing passions being revealed. This is Mars in Scorpio, where Pluto, there's something that has maybe been hidden or in the shadows that may become more conscious and clear. Maybe there's been something going on behind the scenes that only now is becoming known. So Mars square Pluto definitely has this willful quality, this kind of determined pushing quality, and it's going to indicate a day of, some of that sort of disagreement, tension, discord. So maybe don't plan super important events or meetings on that day if you can avoid it. We've definitely got this sort of what's been hidden that's kind of erupting or bursting forward, and how do we navigate that? It's quite likely that there will be some expressions of anger with Mars square Pluto. So it's that sort of simmering, slow burn. What have you been like low to medium grade annoyed about for quite some time? And is there something that just kind of puts you to that boil over place? So that's Mars square Pluto. Definitely not our funnest aspect, but it does come up periodically. We do have those more dynamic aspects between Mars and Pluto every few months. So we are all familiar with them. It's just good to know there's one coming up, in this second last week of September. And from there, things shift a bit. Mars kind of pushes through Scorpio and doesn't interact with any other planets for a number of weeks. Other than the moon, of course. The next planetary aspect with Mars is not until October 20th, where we have by then Mercury in Scorpio. And so we actually have a conjunction from Mercury to Mars in Scorpio. So this is Monday, October 20th, around 19 degrees of Scorpio. And from the perspective of Mars can kind of co-opt or take in the skills of Mercury to help Mars further its own aims. And so Mercury-Mars can be very strategic, very specific. This is a very targeted sort of energy. Like, we're on point, we're well-researched, we're well-informed, we have a clear, detailed plan, we're executing the plan. So we have a decisive quality with Mercury and Mars. So there is this sense of we are choosing, it doesn't have to be perfect. Based on the information we know, we're going to make a decision, we're going to get things done, we're going to keep things moving. We might have sharp words because, of course, with Mercury sort of coming into that real infusion of Mars, Mercury is in a sign ruled by Mars and aspecting Mars. So Mercury is very Mars at the moment. So here we are not trying to finesse or our expressions. We're not trying to, make or keep the peace with our discussions. We're a little bit more direct, a little bit more blunt. We might be a little bit in that kind of drier, factual sort of zone. We want to be careful that we don't use words to hurt or wound. When we get really close or intimate with someone, like a dear friend or a close family member where you have a lot of history, of course, a romantic partner, we have a lot of power to hurt the people that we love. And so with Mercury Mars, we don't want to kind of lash out in anger or in like a reactive emotional way and say something that might be damaging. So there's a little bit of caution that we use that Mercury Mars to kind of be decisive or maybe strategic rather than to kind of use words as weapons, if you like. With that Mercury Mars, I think there's a lot here about strategy, about problem solving, about the game plan, that sort of tactical plan. That's something that Mercury Mars could do very well together. So the idea here is that details and information, our research, can really support taking action and making decisions. So that's a little bit about the Mercury Mars for October 20th. And then we come to the very last week of October, where in quick succession, Mars makes two aspects. Mars will trine Jupiter and then trine Saturn. So Mars trine Jupiter is the 28th of October from 24 Scorpio to 24 Cancer. The very next day, on October 29th, we have Mars trine Saturn, from 25 Scorpio to 25 Pisces. So essentially, Mars is kind of creating a grand trine pattern between, Jupiter and Saturn. So we've got all three superior planets each in a different water sign. And so we get this collaborative quality here. And so this to me feels significant. The superior planets, particularly in ancient astrology, were the planets that came together to indicate a shift in focus or priority or some of those more major changes. And so here with Mars trine Jupiter and Mars trine Saturn, we do have this sense of what kind of plan are we pulling together? How are the pieces in the jigsaw puzzle of your life finally being placed in the best spot for them? So it's maybe moving pieces around on the chessboard of life, but sort of doing so in a way that there's more alignment, maybe there's a little more effectiveness, a little bit more cohesion, or we're starting to bring things together to make things happen. So it feels kind of effective and constructive, if you like, this triple alignment with Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. So you might gather resources and support for a major goal. You might be pulling together, really comprehensive plans for an adventure that you've got coming up. Decisions relating to medium and longer term possibilities are likely. And it's almost as though with that Mars trine Jupiter, Mars trine Saturn, we want to get things done. We want to move forward. We're thinking about where we want to get to and what we can do now that moves us towards what really matters, the priorities, the goals, and the dreams that really inspire and motivate us. So Mars trine Jupiter is October 28, and that is, support and encouragement. There's some opportunities there. Mars trine Jupiter can build confidence or help with enthusiasm. It's almost like that nudge to take a bit of a risk or a leap of faith. And with Mars trine Jupiter, we might get some progress or some welcome action. The very next day, October 29th, we've got Mars trine Saturn, and that can bring some clarifying kind of energy where we really see how to be efficient and effective, like how to be impactful with our actions and to not waste our efforts. So there's a bit of quality control that Mars trine Saturn brings in. It can also help stabilize or steady Mars. So that sense of let's stay on track here, let's keep moving towards the thing that we've identified as being important. It's very boring, Mars trine Saturn, but it can be very productive if we use it well. So Mars trine Saturn might bring this sense of appropriate caution. It's reasonable to be aware, but we don't want to be, it's a trine to Saturn. We're not so afraid that we can't act. We're acting with a sense of we know what the risks are and we feel well resourced to meet and manage those risks if they arise. So Mars trine Saturn is like steady progress while still honoring reasonable limits and necessary responsibilities. So that's kind of a substantive combination that Mars gets involved in towards the end of October, towards the end of its tour through Scorpio. And that is very unique to 2025 because 2 years ago when Mars was last in Scorpio, we didn't have Jupiter in Cancer, so we couldn't get that kind of an alignment. So I've mentioned a couple of times, but just in case you didn't catch that, Mars is only in each zodiac sign once every 2 years. So it's a little bit more of a unique thing to work with. We don't have Mars in Scorpio every year. So the ways in which you can benefit from what this energy and transit might be showing you, you've kind of got the next 6 weeks, and then we won't get another chance until 2027. So the last time Mars was in Scorpio was October, November 2023. And for some of you, it might be helpful to review the actions you were taking then, the decisions you made at that point in time to see how they've worked out and what you might want to tweak now that Mars is back in the same part of your chart again 2 years later. At a personal level, you can really think about the topics of that Scorpio house in your chart. These are the areas of your life where you are ready to reset, to choose a new goal, to set yourself a new challenge. Maybe you've got some overdue decisions about the Scorpio house and the topics associated with it that you now are ready to make. Generally, Mars making its once in 2 year passage through the Scorpio part of your chart, it's time to get moving with the passions and priorities that you really care about there. So I hope this gives you a little bit of a sense of what to expect with Mars in Scorpio, both in terms of the quality of energy and some of the specific aspects that Mars in Scorpio will make in 2025. So as I mentioned earlier too, this will be one of those episodes to bookmark because you'll find it helpful to refer back to this episode as we get into October, especially that second half of October where Mars is making that aspect to Mercury and then that double aspect to Jupiter and Saturn. So let me know what house Mars in Scorpio will transit for you in the comments below. And if you would like to get a solid grounding in the basics of astrology, I hope to see you in beginner astrology class next week. Thanks again for joining me for today's show, everyone. Until next time, take care.